For years, Kelly Clarkson kept her pain locked behind a smile that the whole world could see. She stood on stages, sat behind talk show desks, and sang her heart out in front of millions, all while carrying a secret weight that nobody fully understood. The marriage that once looked like a fairy tale, the partnership that she had described as a love she never thought she deserved, had quietly been crumbling from the inside. And now, for the first time, Kelly is speaking with a level of honesty that is stopping people in their tracks. What she is revealing about Brandon Blackstock, about who he really was behind closed doors, about what truly happened inside that marriage, is something that even her closest fans never saw coming. This is not just a story about a celebrity divorce. This is a story about a woman who spent years pouring herself into a relationship that was slowly draining everything she had. It is a story about manipulation, loneliness, financial betrayal, and the long, painful road back to herself. And it is a story that Kelly Clarkson, one of the most powerful voices in the history of American music, is finally ready to tell. Before we can understand what happened inside Kelly's marriage, we have to understand who Kelly Clarkson really is at her core. She was not born into privilege or comfort. She grew up in Burleson, Texas, in a household that would forever change when her parents divorced while she was just 6 years old. Her siblings were separated, sent to live with different relatives, and young Kelly stayed with her mother. The foundation of her childhood was fractured early, and that fracture left a mark she would carry quietly for decades. Her father, Stephen Michael Clarkson, drifted out of her life almost entirely. He was not there for birthdays, not there for milestones, not there for the ordinary Tuesday afternoons when a child simply needs to know their parent chooses them. Kelly grew up understanding, on a deeply emotional level, what it feels like to be left by someone who was supposed to stay. That wound did not disappear when she became famous. It did not disappear when she won American Idol in 2002, or when she sold millions of records, or when the whole world started singing her songs back to her. She carried it with her, quietly, into every relationship she would ever have. This matters because it explains something essential about how Kelly approached her marriage to Brandon Blackstock. She did not just love him casually. She loved him with the intensity of someone who had spent her entire life searching for proof that she was worth staying for. When she sang about him, when she spoke about him in interviews with glowing warmth, it was real. The hope was real. The vulnerability was real. And that is precisely what made what came next so devastating. Kelly first crossed paths with Brandon Blackstock in 2006 during rehearsals for the Academy of Country Music Awards. At the time, nothing romantic developed between them. He was working as a talent manager, connected to the country music world through his father, Narvel Blackstock, who was a longtime manager of Reba McEntire. Their lives briefly touched and then moved on in separate directions. But fate, or perhaps something more complicated than fate, brought them back together. When they reconnected years later, the chemistry between them was undeniable. By December 2012, Brandon had proposed, and Kelly said yes with a kind of joy that made headlines around the world. They married in October 2013 in a ceremony that felt like the beginning of everything good. Brandon already had 2 children from a previous relationship, and Kelly embraced them fully. Then came their daughter, River Rose, born in 2014, followed by their son, Remington Alexander, in 2016. To the public, this looked like a love story worth celebrating. Kelly spoke about Brandon in interviews with a warmth and admiration that felt completely genuine. She said he was a person who showed her what real love looked like, the person who stayed when everyone else had walked away. For a woman who had spent her childhood watching her father disappear, finding someone she believed was truly present felt like healing an old wound. She trusted him completely. That trust, it would turn out, was something Brandon would exploit in ways that Kelly is only now beginning to speak about behind the warmth that Kelly projected publicly. Something else was happening privately. The loneliness crept in slowly, the way it often does in relationships that are not working. She later described feeling, many times, as though she was living the life of a single woman even while she was married. The partnership she had dreamed of, the presence she had hoped for, was not materializing the way she had imagined. But the emotional distance was only one layer of a much more complicated reality. What has begun to emerge in the years since their divorce is a picture of a relationship that had serious problems that went far beyond 2 people simply growing apart. Brandon Blackstock, the man Kelly had trusted with her heart, her family, and her career, was allegedly operating in ways that served his own interests at the direct expense of Hayes. One of the most shocking revelations to surface involved the financial dimension of their relationship. Brandon was not just Kelly's husband. He was also, for a significant period, functioning in a managerial capacity that connected him directly to her professional earnings. When the marriage ended and the legal battles began, investigators began to look closely at the financial arrangements that had existed between them. What they found raised serious questions. It was revealed through court proceedings that Brandon had allegedly collected commissions from Kelly's earnings that he was not actually licensed to collect in the state of California. The California Labor Commission became involved in the dispute, and the findings painted a troubling picture. The man Kelly had loved and trusted had allegedly been taking money from her professional work through channels that were not legally appropriate. For a woman who had worked extraordinarily hard her entire life, who had fought her way from waitressing at a comedy club to selling millions of records worldwide, the idea that the person closest to her had been financially benefiting from her in unauthorized ways was a wound. That cut incredibly deep. When Kelly filed for divorce in June 2020, citing irreconcilable differences, she did so after years of quiet struggle. This was not a decision she made impulsively or out of momentary frustration. She had spent years trying to hold something together that, piece by piece, had been falling apart. The filing was a result of an accumulation of pain that had been building far longer than the public knew. What followed was not a clean or dignified separation. It became a prolonged, contentious legal battle that touched almost every area of their shared life. Custody of their 2 young children was fiercely contested. Their Montana ranch, a property that held enormous financial and personal significance, became a central battleground. Brandon fought for a portion of it. The courts ultimately ruled that the ranch belonged to Kelly. But even after that ruling, Brandon remained on the property, and a court eventually had to order him to vacate by June 2022. The spousal support dispute added another painful layer. Brandon sought significant financial support from Kelly, a request that many observers found difficult to reconcile with the power dynamic that had allegedly existed in their marriage. Here was a woman who had built a career through decades of relentless work, who had sold tens of millions of records, who had created an entertainment legacy that most artists can only dream of, being asked to financially support the man who had allegedly been collecting money from her earnings without proper authorization. Kelly, who had spent so much of her life being quiet about her pain, found her voice during this period, not in a performative or revenge-driven way, but in the honest, unfiltered way that has always been her most powerful quality. She stopped softening the edges of her experience for the comfort what Kelly has begun to articulate, slowly and carefully, is something that many women in complicated relationships recognize immediately. It is the experience of having your sense of reality gradually shaped by someone who benefits from you doubting yourself. She has spoken about the emotional toll of the marriage with increasing candor, describing feelings of confusion, isolation, and a diminishing sense of her own worth that did not match the confidence she projected on stage. The person who stood in front of thousands of people and sang with the full force of her voice was also, privately, a woman who had been made to feel increasingly small inside her own home. The contrast between the Kelly Clarkson the world saw and the Kelly Clarkson who was living through those years is something she has described as deeply disorienting. Brandon, by multiple accounts, positioned himself as an essential figure in her professional world while simultaneously being present as a husband and the father of her children. That blurring of roles, the professional and the personal existing in one person who held significant power over multiple dimensions of her life, created a dynamic that was difficult for Kelly to fully see while she was inside it. It is a kind of situation that only becomes clear from the outside, after distance, and time have allowed a person to look back and recognize what was actually happening, what nobody fully understood, and what Kelly is now speaking about with remarkable courage, is how thoroughly that dynamic had hollowed her out. She was giving everything, to her children, to her career, to the marriage, to a professional relationship with a man who was simultaneously her partner, and receiving far less than she deserved in return. Or of other people, in February 2022, Kelly legally changed her name to Kelly Brianne. She was clear that she would continue using Kelly Clarkson professionally, but the personal name change was deeply meaningful. It was a way of shedding a piece of an identity that had become tangled up with pain and reclaiming something that was purely her own. She connected the decision explicitly to her complicated feelings about her father, Stephen Michael Clarkson, whose last name she had carried her entire life. A father who left. A husband who, in different ways, also left. Both men had held significant places in her life and had caused a significant pain. The name change was Kelly drawing a line. It was an act of quiet self-reclamation that said, clearly and without apology, that she was choosing herself. That decision, small as it might seem to an outside observer, was actually enormous. It was the kind of thing a person does when they are finally done apologizing for existing, finally done organizing their identity around someone else's presence or absence. Artists process their lives through their work. Kelly has always done this with extraordinary honesty, and the music she created in the aftermath of a marriage and divorce is some of the most powerful of her career. Her 10th studio album, Chemistry, released in June 2023, was a direct reckoning with everything she had been through. It explored love, betrayal, heartbreak, and the complicated process of healing from a relationship that had defined a chapter of her life. Critics responded to Chemistry with genuine admiration, recognizing that something had shifted in Kelly's artistry. The album had a rawness and an emotional precision that only comes from lived experience. She was not writing characters or crafting narratives at a safe distance. She was excavating her own story and laying it out for the world to hear. That takes an enormous amount of courage, especially for a woman who had spent years maintaining a carefully composed public image. The album was also a declaration. It was Kelly telling anyone who cared to listen that she had survived, that she was still here, and that she was not going to pretend the past few years had been anything other than what they were. In 2023, Kelly made a decision to relocate to New York City with her children to continue filming The Kelly Clarkson Show. On the surface, it was a professional move. Beneath the surface, it was something far more intentional. It was a fresh start in the most literal sense, a physical removal from the geography of her pain, a new city where she could build a life that was entirely on her own terms. New York suited her in ways she had not fully anticipated. The energy of the city, its relentless forward momentum, its refusal to allow anyone to simply stand still, matched something that was emerging in her. She was not running away from her past. She was running towards something she had not yet fully defined but could feel pulling her forward. Her talk show thrived in its new home. Audiences connected with a version of Kelly that felt more liberated than ever before. She was funnier, more candid, more willing to sit with uncomfortable topics and explore them honestly. The woman who had spent years carrying private pain was finding ways to transform that pain into genuine connection with the people who showed up every day to watch her. She focused intensely on her children during this period, making sure River and Remington felt secure and loved throughout a transition that could easily have been destabilizing for them. She was determined that whatever she had been through would not become their burden to carry. She built new routines with them, created new memories, and showed them, through her daily choices, what it looks like to pick yourself up and keep moving. The thing about Kelly Clarkson that has always set her apart from almost every other artist of her generation is a refusal to perform emotion she does not actually feel. She cannot do it. It is not in her nature. When she is hurting, it comes through in her voice, in her eyes, in the slight catch at the end of a phrase that no production trick could ever manufacture. And when she is finally free, that comes through too. What she wants the world to know about Brandon Blackstock is not rooted in bitterness. She is not speaking from a place of wanting to destroy his reputation or settle scores publicly. She is speaking from a place of finally understanding, fully and without the distortions of fear or hope or misplaced loyalty, what her marriage actually was. She is speaking because silence has a cost, and she has already paid that cost for long enough. She wants other women who have lived through similar experiences to recognize something essential, that feeling lonely inside a marriage is not a personal failure. That having your professional and personal trust exploited by the same person is not something you should have seen coming or prevented. That the fact that you love someone completely does not mean they loved you the same way in return. And that walking away from something that is hurting you, even when it is terrifying, even when it means legal battles and public scrutiny and rebuilding your entire life from the ground up, is one of the bravest things a person can do. Kelly Clarkson did not become one of the most successful artists of the 21st century by being fragile. She became who she is by being resilient in the specific, unglamorous way that real resilience actually looks. Not triumph,